I don't even have a watch. I do have a phone. I'm wondering actually how many of you have your phone with you today? And could you get them out? Get them out. I'd like you to maybe get used to having your phones out, still on silent, mind you. And if you haven't done that yet, it might be a good time to sneak the silent button on. Could you lift them up? Okay, now keep your hands up if you have Twitter installed on your phone, if it's on your phone. You used to have it installed. Please, okay, thank you. Phew. Okay, now keep your hands up if you know how to use Twitter. Okay. That's great. So you can put your hands down now. There are some weeks in the future where the second reflection of the traditional practice, this practice, will feature your questions raised by the first reflection, communicated to me by Twitter. I will respond to them in the second reflection. I will wrestle with them right here. And so we'll collaborate in this way. So I have no idea how to do Twitter either. But millions of people do. And I bet we can figure it out. I bet you can figure it out on your own without us offering a Twitter workshop that everyone will ask for and no one will come to. There you go. You know, we're smart, resourceful people. So let's learn Twitter between now and the next time I preach. And then we'll experiment with some collaborative practices. Probably not every Sunday, but at least a couple Sundays a month, at least one Sunday a month. And there's a part of me that's very excited about this, and there's another part of me, to tell you the truth, that is terrified about it, because honestly, there is some tenderness in a reflection freshly revealed. So there is some vulnerability in this practice. It's true that in this pulpit, I am a pretty confident hombre. And that confidence allows me to be vulnerable in front of you. But more than that, my trust in you, and I think my sense of your trust in me, that is our trust in the values that hold us together, I think makes that vulnerability possible. It'd be nice if every reflection I offered you and every response to your questions to come was perfect and airtight, but I think you know by now, you can probably tell just by looking that ain't happening. And we would all be the worse for it to pretend or expect for that to happen. So I have to be willing to mess up and get it wrong, to miss the mark right in front of you all, in front of YouTube, in front of my mom. But this is good. You see, we ministers are supposed to model behavior, right? It wouldn't do, for instance, for me to preach on non-reactivity and then go berserk when someone turns joys and sorrows into an announcement. No. Authority comes from integrity. Whatever authority you grant me comes from me practicing what I preach. So I hope I'm not peeling the curtain back too much to reveal that in addition to crafting a more creative practice, a more collaborative practice, I hope that I'm also modeling courage in the face of vulnerability. So this reflection was not titled Courage in Twitter. It's loving the hell out of the world. So shouldn't we be talking about something justicey? But it turns out that courage in the face of vulnerability is both precious and essential for cohesive community as well as political and spiritual freedom. And not just our political and spiritual freedom. Justice doesn't happen without courage in the face of vulnerability. Justice doesn't happen without courage in the face of vulnerability.
I got it.
Coincidentally, without courage in the face of vulnerability, love doesn't happen. And justice doesn't happen without love. In Love as the Practice of Freedom, author and activist and feminist Bell Hooks writes, "Without an ethic of love shaping the direction of our political vision and our radical aspirations, we are often seduced in one way or another into continued allegiance to the systems of domination, imperialism, sexism, racism, classism, without an ethic of love. The moment we choose to love," Hooks continues, "we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom and to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others." Justice cannot happen without love. And if you think about it, love cannot happen without justice. At least between two people. And given that they both require courage in the face of vulnerability, it seems that we have found something to practice. And you know what? I need the practice. Because outside of this pulpit, I'm not real good at this. Just this past week, I was on my way home from a minister's retreat in Los Angeles. I was in a car with 3 clergy from the Baja 4. We stopped to refuel, and as I returned to the pump from the little store that's attached to the gas station there, I saw one of my colleagues crouched down at the window of someone else's car. I thought, hey, neat, we bumped into another bunch of ministers heading somewhere in California, and they're chatting. But as I got closer, I could see he was talking to a woman that none of us knew. And this woman was weeping. She was a mother, as evidenced by the child in the car seat in the back. And except for being distraught, she did not appear to be exactly desperate. She looked healthy, well-fed, and well-groomed. Her car was in better shape than either of my cars. But as I passed, I heard my colleague say to her, "No, that's not true. People do care." And then he stood and he offered to pay for some gas. And he was gone for a little while, pain inside. And the woman continued to weep and to wipe tears from her eyes. And the little girl in the back seemed to be doing better than her mom, but it was breaking my heart that she had to witness her mother in that state. While my colleague was away, I sat in the car, wondering if I should do something too. Should I give the woman some cash? Should I at least say something? I am a minister, after all, and aren't we supposed to? Or would that be too overwhelming? Would she be overwhelmed by another minister appearing at her window? Might she be embarrassed by my additional attention? That is a stupid question. I asked myself many stupid questions in that time. Perhaps you hear echoes to the rabbit on the rabbit's own hill. Now, the truth is, I think I was afraid. Why on earth was I afraid? Was I afraid I would lose time, money, energy? Was I afraid I would become involved? I think it may have had something to do with me being afraid of her pain. I'm not entirely sure why that is. Perhaps because I was afraid of my own pain. Or perhaps I was afraid of her pain in the way that a potential rescuer is afraid of a drowning person. A drowning person is dangerous. It's not logical, it's fear. And I'm trying to rationalize my involvement and not get involved. And then post-incident, I was trying to rationalize my uninvolvement. Not to excuse it, but just to figure it out. But there's no figuring out fear. I mean, it's not logical. And I got hooked by my fear. In the end, my only act was to thank my colleague for stepping in where I was too hamstrung to do so. Now, my intention in telling the story is not to self-flagellate or to absolve myself by public confession, though if that works, I'll take it. Now, I tell this story because I think it demonstrates a condition that is more common than not, and one that is at the root of much justice work, which is, by the way, in the end, the work of healing and the work of love. The root of this condition that prevents us from the work of healing and love is fear. People are afraid, and we're afraid of consequences of engaging the justice work, yes. The danger, because there's some danger in justice work, the tumult, the drain on resources, on energy, the possibility that your cause may lose, all of those things are things for which we may have some fear, but we are also afraid of what that fear will cost us in terms of our own self-conception. I think we are afraid of the mirror that will present itself when we open up and engage another person. We are afraid of the pain that we must encounter to do justice work, which means, in essence, we are afraid to love. That actually makes a lot of sense, but it doesn't make it right. Today, and in this way, justice work is as much a work of the spirit, mind, and heart as it is of legislation and adjudication. We need the ACLU to change the systems, but we also need to change the systems of our hearts and our minds and our spirits. For example, the confluence of race and law enforcement present us with clear and deadly evidence that implicates us as a culture as much as it does those directly involved in those tragic circumstances. The whole culture. After all, these gruesome and unjust killings are mostly operating within the letter of the law. And actually, to me, this does not indicate that we necessarily need to change the law, although we may. To me, it does indicate that it's not the law that's killing people, it's the mindset that is rampant and permeates our culture that is costing people lives. And it is a mindset that, while honed to a razor's edge by the work our police do, is far and away not the sole province of the people working in law enforcement. It is a cultural mindset of domination and a mindset that is insidious in its ubiquity. It is in the air we breathe. It's everywhere, and the first place to find it then, the first place to begin working on it, is not necessarily in the powers and principalities, but rather in the mirror. And to do that takes courage in the face of vulnerability. I think we often approach the inherent worth and dignity of all people as something to acknowledge and recognize. And in that way, it is almost as though it is ours to grant. The action, if not the emotion behind it, the action becomes your inherent worth and dignity appear to me when I recognize it, when I grant it. But that's not the truth. But the truth takes work to uncover. Inherent worth and dignity, of course, is not ours to grant, it's ours to discover. To truly see another's worth is actually no offhand thing. It requires that we open ourselves up to them, that we listen and accept them on a fundamental level. Friends and adversaries alike. This is true of how we engage ourselves as well. And to do that work, takes courage and vulnerability. It takes finding somebody to love. Now, that song isn't asking for someone to love me. It's asking to find me somebody to love. The answer presented by Freddie Mercury to the toil and pain and doubt of the everyday is to find somebody to love. Now, for musical and sanity purposes, we had to cut a verse that I want to share with you that goes, I've just got to get out of my prison cell. Someday I'm gonna be free. Oh. So the prison cell is whatever box you've locked yourself in. The key to unlock that prison door is finding a way to love. Finding a way to love in spite of the self-doubt and daily grind that drains us of our sense of time and injects us with self-interest. And self-interest is the slippery slope to a life hooked by fear. It is the path to staying on your hill and in the car. There is risk in love, and we know this, but there is no justice without love. So there is risk in justice making, and this is a risk that we must take for the sake of our world, for the sake of our enemies, for the sake of our neighbors and friends, and for ourselves. Risk requires courage in the face of vulnerability. And this is why courage in the face of vulnerability is both precious and essential for cohesive community as well as political and spiritual freedom. And we actually practice this courage together already. We practice courage in the face of vulnerability together already because we practice our vulnerability together here every Sunday, at least. And here is the practice that encourages vulnerability while fortifying courage. Here is a method that when you are wondering if you can do anything, if you're on your hill or in your car and you're wondering what you can do, and you're going through all these little excuses to get out of doing it, what's helpful to me in that moment is to have a method. And the method is simple. It's listening. Listening is part of the work of justice because finally it gets behind the reactivity and seeks to understand fundamental needs. So we listen to what folks say, but also while listening, we can seek to understand the more fundamental needs, working on both the other and on ourselves. What are they afraid of? What am I afraid of? Therein lies the causes of injustice. That's where we can address it. And that is where a permanent solution of seeing one another can be found. Listening prevents and circumvents oppositional politics and gets to the core of who we are as people. It's a practice that benefits the other and yourself. True listening, right? You have to quiet your mind. You have to find a non-reactive presence. You have to engage your empathy. And now you are connected. My colleague, Reverend Megan Cephalou, recently directed me to the words of author and theologian David Augsburger, who said that being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, whatever that means, they are almost indistinguishable. When we really listen to someone, we place all of our attention upon them. And when we place all our attention on another without getting in the way, something happens. It opens a channel between you. And that takes courage in the face of vulnerability too. So we practice this art every Sunday in Joys and Sorrows, and also in you reflecting on the reflections that I offer you. We practice this in many informal ways in our congregational interactions. And because it is practiced here, we may be more adept at practicing it beyond our walls. Or perhaps in noticing it when we do not do it. I noticed when I did not do it. And now I know what needs to be done. So this is the first work of justice. This listening. Listening, of course, requires presence. You have to show up. You have to show up ready to listen, willing to be vulnerable and open to a connection, even with our adversaries. And I know this is hard. I know it takes practice. Luckily, we have opportunities to do that every Sunday. And we have opportunities to do that especially today. There's a committee of the whole justice meeting after church. There is a PCICEO gathering forum listening session this afternoon at 4 at Amphitheater School. And today is Tucson's celebration of Pride. There are multiple opportunities for you to engage in some deep listening today. I encourage you to do that. And if you want to go deeper into this practice, next Sunday's contemplative practice at 9 a.m. is going to be all about the art of deep listening. You've shown up here. We practice together. Let us continue to take our practice into the world.